In this presentation, we're going to introduce the basic concepts of security management. Security management requires analyzing the context, but more importantly, knowing how to identify and mitigate risks in our particular environment. Let's look at a simple example. You're about to cross the road. What are the threats? Traffic, cars, the speed they're traveling at, the kind of vehicles. These threats require us to ask ourselves, what's our vulnerability? For example, we're more vulnerable on the road than on the sidewalk, more at night when roads aren't lit than during the day, and in places with no road signs. What's the risk? Being knocked over by a car. So the risk is when threat and vulnerability meet, the consequences of which can be fatal. That's a risk analysis, as easy as that. The first step is to understand your environment, the factors external to MSF, the social structure of the community where we work, the geopolitical situation, the health situation in relation to our operations, the presence of other humanitarian organizations, infrastructure, etc. The second step is to know who we are. This means knowing the factors internal to MSF, MSF's history in the area, the purpose of our presence in a given context, the nature of our activities and of those of other MSF sections. Understanding and analyzing the context is essential to conducting our operations successfully and under the safest possible conditions. Understanding the context requires interacting with key players in our environment, whether they are armed groups or the authorities and other representatives such as traditional leaders and, of course, our teams. Let's now define several key concepts. Threat. This is an external danger we could face, for example, a group of people or a natural disaster. Vulnerabilities. These are elements internal to MSF expose us, but which we can control. For example, the composition of the team, location of activities, staff movements, type of activities, target population. Risk. This is when the threat and the vulnerability converge, meaning a potential event that can have more or less serious consequences. Risk mitigation. These are measures we take to try and prevent the risk from occurring or to mitigate its impact if it does. Context analysis and knowing your environment enable you to identify inherent risks. Risk analysis is a collective process. It requires including the maximum number of people with a range of profiles. It's also an ongoing process. For example, when you decide to move around, your decision is taken on the basis of your risk analysis. Set out in a document, it provides a common base for all the members of the team to share. Once the risks are identified, we can implement measures to mitigate and prevent them. Let's cross the road again. What are the possible strategies we can utilize? Refusing the risk, we don't cross the road. Accepting the risk, we cross the road without taking any particular measures and accept the possibility of getting hit by a car. Transferring the risk, if you have to cross the road to meet a friend, you ask him to come over to you so he takes the risk. Implementing mitigation measures, look at the road, cars and traffic before crossing and base your decision on these elements. Mitigation measures reduce the probability and/or the impact of a risk. We can use two categories of tools for putting in place mitigation measures. Protocols, standard operating procedures, checklists, signage, contingency plans in the event of evacuation or hibernation. Management, informing and training teams on managing security, briefings and debriefings, action plans, simulations and evacuation drills, for example in case of fire. Important, we do not comply blindly with security measures. We understand why they have been implemented and adapt them according to our analysis of identified risks. Let's cross the road again. We only cross when the pedestrian crossing sign is green, but this doesn't necessarily alter our risk exposure. If the pedestrian crossing sign is green but a car doesn't stop, you have to adapt to the situation. To protect yourself, you don't cross. Understanding the security rules and their purpose is absolutely crucial. In 95% of the cases, they protect us. As for the remaining 5%, in the face of exceptional circumstances, we have to adapt them as best as we can. Managing risks is a collective, dynamic and ongoing process. It concerns everyone, and everyone must contribute to it. We have to understand our environment, the purpose of our presence in a given context, our activities and why we put security measures in place. These measures must relate and be adapted to identified risks.